Good morning, good evening, shalom, wherever you are, and welcome to our session today, speaking about Turkey testing the waters in the Mediterranean. It's my very pleasure to welcome you and wish you all the best for the new Jewish year from Berlin. Today, we speak about quite an important topic, not only for Israel, but also for Europe and the NATO. As you all and we all are quite aware about, Turkish politics is playing quite an increasing role in the region, as the Turkish government is handing out to more and more territories and further topics meanwhile. So having said that, it is my pleasure to welcome the senior member of the German Parliament, Dr. Andreas Nick, for our call today. He is not only a senior member of the German Bundestag for the ruling Christian Democratic Party, but he's also a member of the Committee on Foreign Affairs and as well the Subcommittee of the Middle East and the Arab World, where he is a rapporteur on Turkey. And prior to starting his political career, MP Dr. Nick worked in corporate finance and management in Frankfurt and London, with degrees in business administration and public policy from German and the US universities. Andreas, without further ado, it's my pleasure to give you the floor. We have a quick impulse from your side, which is on the record. And afterwards, we have, as usually, a Q&A session. This time, it will be off the records. So please, everyone on this call, feel invited to join with your questions. Either you write them in the chat beforehand and we can read them out, or just give us a sign that you would like to drop a question, and happy to give you the floor afterwards. So again, Andreas, welcome here at our weekly call, and the floor is yours. You're on mute.
Yeah, sorry, I put on mute because there was some reconnection there before. Yeah, thank you very much for inviting me. Welcome, Happy New Year to everyone celebrating this at this time of the year. I hope this works technically, because I'm doing this not from a perfect TV studio in Berlin, but from a rather improvised from my constituency office in the German countryside. So welcome everybody. This is clearly an important topic as we speak, which keeps a lot of foreign policy people busy, also in Germany and throughout Europe as we speak. What I suggest to do is give you a bit of an introduction in 4 points, more general background on the development of Turkish policy in the region, then talking a bit more specifically about what is going on in the naval conflict between Turkey and Greece in particular at the moment. What is the, let's say, more short-term reaction and response from a German and European side? And finally, how do we see that over the long term in terms of our own strategic interests and positioning in the region? And as we will then have a Q&A session, which is off the record, I can give maybe a bit more background here and there if you have more specific questions. I hope that works fine for everybody. I think as we speak, and I've been covering the Turkey portfolio now for 7 or 8 years as a member of the German Parliament, we see 2 main developments, I think, in Turkish policy. One more domestically, which is an ongoing trend which you can describe as Islamification or nationalization, or tendency towards a more authoritarian rule internally, at least what you can describe as an unwinding of the Kemalist secular reforms which have shaped the Turkish Republic for the last almost 100 years. And the 2023 anniversary of the foundation of the Republic, that is something that I may come back later, is a very pivotal point of reference in the whole situation. So that is more the domestic situation. The other, if you look more at the foreign policy side, is clearly a more assertive behavior by Turkey in the region and beyond. Some may have described this as a neo-Ottoman approach, trying to follow on the tradition of the Ottoman Empire that was dissolved more than 100 years ago. How that will unfold in every specific issue is another matter. Not necessarily. I think the Ottoman Empire was overly popular wherever it was based, especially in the Arab world, so that we may discuss some of that repercussions later on. A couple of years ago then, Foreign Minister, later Prime Minister Davutoglu laid out a foreign policy doctrine which was headlined "Zero Problems with Neighbors," which I think from hindsight was not what is really unfolding, not necessarily only because of Turkey's own behavior in the region. One has to remember that Turkey is faced with a highly challenging neighborhood from Syria to Iraq to Iran that has impacts and repercussions also on the country itself. In some cases, this is linking internal and external threats and perceived threats, as we speak, for example, about the Kurdish issue, and Turkish foreign policy and Turkish policy in general is viewing, I think, a lot of the developments in the region also through the lens of the Kurdish issue. And not to forget the coup attempt in 2016, I think, has had some traumatic effects on those ruling in Ankara, also with regard, I think, to their assessment of the reactions of Western allies in this context. And I think what we have observed clearly is more an increased militarization of Turkish foreign policy, with the objective, I think, to become more of an independent pole in a multipolar regional order and globally. Not to forget, Turkey is still a member of NATO and in a very important geography at the crossroads between Europe and Asia, at the entrance to the Black Sea, and has a high strategic importance on the southeastern flank of NATO. Nevertheless, we've seen more pursuit of more national and specific policies with regard to the interventions in Syria. Not to forget that Turkey has taken in 3 to 4 million refugees, in particular from Syria, but also from other countries in the Middle East, and has been quite instrumental, and so to a certain extent also of sheltering huge numbers of refugees and keeping them as a host country from entering the European Union and further on. We have lately seen intervention in the Libyan civil war, which is continues to be critically viewed by many observers, also in the context of potential violations of the UN weapon embargo. Nevertheless, I think the observation is also that Turkey is and has been intervening on the side of the UN-recognized legitimate government of Libya, and has, to a certain extent, also recreated a military balance in the country that has been an important context factor for other diplomatic initiatives, in particular the Berlin Conference, in trying to come to a political solution for the country. So ongoing attempts, I think, by Turkey to attain a veto player position in various conflicts and regional issues, being to a certain extent a disruptive power, trying to gain a level of attention. And as always, when you talk about Turkey, a lot of that is shaped and influenced by historic experience, as is the reference to the history of the Ottoman Empire. When it comes to the relation of Turkey with the Western world, very frequently will come across the term of the Sevr trauma or Sevr complex, which was the post 1918 treaty in the Paris Suburb Treaty on with the dissolved Ottoman Empire in terms of the future regulation of the region, which I think was seeing largely a dismantling of the Ottoman Empire. Some of that being then reversed with the Treaty of Lausanne in the early 1920s. You also see a renaissance of something which is referred to as the Blue Homeland Doctrine, which is an ideological attempt, I think, to turn Turkey from only a land power also to a maritime power in the region, which is also a historic conflict with Greece as the dominant maritime power in the region, which is also reflected in some of the current things going on. And this is, I think, where what we see happening at the moment is at the surface a conflict on exploratory and drilling activities on the right to gas deposits in especially in the Aegean Sea and in the Mediterranean. But I think we would be ill-advised to see this just as an economic conflict on resources, but it is, I think, a broader issue on prestige and status issues that has some dangerous potential repercussions. At the base of that is that law of the sea is in many instances, as I've been advised recently as well, is quite a fuzzy issue where different interpretations and different bases of claims can quite easily conflict. That has been the case in this region for many decades, going back to the fact that the islands for example, in particular Dodecanese Islands, were taken away from the Ottoman Empire after the First World War, handed over to the Italians, and then at later point to Greece. There have been ongoing rows on this region in the past, but they have intensified lately with the detection of major gas reserves in that area. Nevertheless, if you talk to energy economists, a lot of people would advise that it's rather questionable to what extent that gas will ever be able to be explored in a profitable and competitive way compared to gas offerings that we see from other regions in Europe, mainly Russia, but also in direct comparison to the recent gas findings of Turkey in the Black Sea that could be exploited faster and cheaper. And what we see conflicting is, I think, a quite narrow and precise interpretation of international law, in particular by Greece and Cyprus, mainly referring to United Nations Convention on the Law of the Seas, which, however, Turkey has never signed or ratified. Turkey derives its position from historical and other arguments, arguing, I think, on the basis of its continental shelf and the direction and the rights that are derived from that. As we see it, I think there is no clear legal black and white situation. If you look at some of the situations, I think every party has some reasonable and legitimate claims to make. If you look at the Aegean Sea, clearly, if on a maximum interpretation, this could almost turn into a domestic Greek part of the sea, and there is a Turkish position that would say to some point that they seem to be landlocked and locked away from the sea, not only in the Aegean but also in the Eastern Mediterranean, by some of that claims. And there's, let's say, take one particular example, which is the island of Castello Rizzo, which is a very small island, the most eastward island belonging to Greece. To what extent you could really argue for a exclusive economic zone around an island as such, which is just in the front of the mainland of another country, is really an issue. If you go to some of the examples around the world, you could well come to the conclusion that viable and sustainable solutions in situations of that kind may only be found at the negotiating table and not by just referring to historical or legal claims. But to be crystal clear, the aggressive Turkish rhetoric and behavior that we observe lately is, of course, totally unacceptable. And further escalation, which may well lead into military confrontations or even acts of war in maritime encounters, would be a major risk for overall stability of the region and can be in no party's interest. Just reminding that many of the Greek islands in this area are quite prominent tourist destinations that could also be severely affected, I think, if they are perceived by their potential customers as being in a potential war. So what do we? What can we do from a German or European side to de-escalate that conflict? I think, of course, there is a close proximity with Greece and Cyprus being members of the European Union, so they have a lot of support in rejecting aggressive Turkish military actions and behavior in the region. I think we have seen some de-escalation over the last couple of days. Whether that will be sustainable remains to be seen. We have seen first military-to-military contacts within NATO to at least prevent some arbitrary or accidental military escalation. And with particular German involvement, we have also tried to moderate and facilitate talks between both countries, which have been slightly derailed recently, but we may be able to get further there. As you will be aware, our French friends have very proactively taken a supportive side for Greece in also in having military exercises with maritime exercises in the region together with Greece. It's probably not unfair to say that French-Turkish tensions have also a bit to do with their opposing positions in Libya. But we would strongly encourage both parties to return to exploratory talks and refrain from further unilateral actions. With the ongoing and upcoming meetings of the UN foreign ministers and the EU Council, as Mr. Borrell, the foreign policy representative, has made clear, that this may be well leading to the crossroads concerning EU-Turkey relations. We have seen attempts, in particular by Cyprus, I think still as of today, if I'm correctly informed, to link the question of sanctions against Belarus with also the EU imposing sanctions on Turkey. Clearly a linkage that we consider not to be helpful. I think if we start horse trading like this on important foreign policy issues, this may not be very helpful in enabling EU action on whatever case. I have to say that we have seen in the past similar behavior by Turkey also within NATO, by linking certain steps by other NATO allies and making that as a precondition for Turkey signing up on certain action plans of NATO with Ukraine. So I think these kind of linkages between policy issues that have no substantial interconnection is clearly not considered helpful, and is counterproductive both within the EU as well as a NATO framework. Clearly, from a German side, it is a high priority also to keep the EU together and able to act also in those areas. While we may have different geographic perspectives and historical linkages in some of those conflicts, I think we should always make sure that we turn this diversity of perspectives into a strength rather than a divisive issue. Finally, if I look to the longer term in terms of where we see Turkey going in our strategic relationship with Turkey, I mentioned the year 2023 before. This is the centenary of the founding of the Republic of Turkey. It is, from all we understand, a point in time that President Erdogan references where he wants to be finalizing his attempt of building a revised and renewed Turkey that is even moving further away from its Kemalist tradition. This is still happening in a period where also Turkey is facing significant economic and domestic challenges. So these increased nationalist and Islamist rhetoric is also, to a certain extent, probably counterweighing some of the economic and political pressures that they are feeling domestically. Just as an aside, as many of you look at the region from through the prism also of the Israeli situation and ongoing developments, at least in the pre-Erdogan era, Turkey was probably one of the closest partners for Israel in the region that has dramatically changed to the negative. And as we see unfolding that the Sunni Shia, or maybe even better, the Saudi-Iran conflict in the region is more and more superseding the Israeli-Palestine conflict, also with the recent agreements with the Emirates and Bahrain and others. I think one has also to be critically aware whether Mr. Erdogan may try to present himself in the future more even as the main patron or protective power of the Palestinians in this region, maybe in competition or limited coordination with Iran in that region. So that is clearly also, I think, a point to watch with all these connections to Hamas, to the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt and other places. But zooming back on the big picture, I think from a Western European perspective, with all valid criticism that we have towards Mr. Erdogan and his government and his policies, we still, I think, have a key strategic interest in strengthening existing ties of Turkey with the West, both within NATO, the Council of Europe, the OSCE, or also as a EU accession candidate. Also, most of those talks are on ice. We have clearly also a strategic interest to increase our influence and our pressure on the Turkish government that their own behavior domestically and in foreign policy is in accordance with being a partner to Europe and the West, to being a credible member of NATO and other institutions. Just to give you an example, that has, I think, also to do with Turkey's domestic situation, as I'm also chairing the German delegation to the Council of Europe's Parliamentary Assembly. Compliance or non-compliance with rulings of the European Court of Human Rights, which is one of the key instruments of the Council of Europe, where Turkey is practically a founding member, has a critical implication, I think, of relations with the country. If you take the current cases of Osman Kavala or Selahattin Demirtas, if release from prison is demanded by the European Court of Human Rights and there's no compliance with these judgments and these rulings, this could have a severe impact on bilateral relations. All in all, I think with all the increasing challenges coming from Turkish behavior domestically and in its foreign policy, we still have, I think, a key interest to maintain Turkey as and help it to turn back into a responsible actor in the region. I think Turkey, without any embeddedness in alliances, in strategic relations with Western parties, would be even more challenging player in the region, and we have probably a vested interest to keep Turkey integrated in existing structures and alliances, rather than be, with all the difficulties and challenges that this may encounter, rather than them being completely cornered and unilateral in their actions. And this is going probably beyond the national situation, because still Turkey, I think, is a living bridge between the West and the Islamic world, and we have to make our own contribution in order to be stable and sustainable as a bridge in the long term. The country must be equally and firmly anchored on both shores, both in the West and in the Muslim world. So much from my side. Sorry, it was a bit too long probably, but now we can move to the Q&A part, which we have declared off the records.
Yes, thank you very much, Andreas, so far for this on the record part, and to give more room to all kinds of questions. I think now it's a good point to switch to off the records. So as Julia already put in the chat box, please feel free to drop your questions there. We already have a first one, but to start with, Andreas, because you mentioned the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe, where you are a member. So you're also an expert on European politics, which is quite complex, to say it in an easy way, in particular when you look at it from abroad, the European borders. So will it be possible, what do you think, to have indeed a united front in Europe against Turkey's actions, destabilizing the Eastern Mediterranean? So how to deal with different positions, for example, from Germany and France?
I think, as I said before, I think in many instances, I think slightly different perspectives from major European countries can indeed be a weakness, but they can also be turned into a strength, because they may be to a large extent complementary. I think this has been the case in the past. When I look at the 2015 period, French perspective was very much looking towards the Maghreb and Northern Africa. German perspective was very much focused on Ukraine, and it doesn't necessarily be competitive, but it can be very complementary. In this particular case, as I mentioned, I think France has taken quite an aggressive stance, very much also militarily siding with Greece in some of the situations. I've mentioned also the background of the Turkish-French confrontation in Libya, where they find themselves on different sides of the civil war. And I think from a German perspective, I think it's absolutely clear that institutionally we are closely aligned with our friends and allies in Greece. Nevertheless, I think we have historically a very strong bilateral relationship with Turkey. That has some particular context factors. I think there are over 3 million people of Turkish origin living in Germany. There's probably no other society worldwide with which we are so much intertwined. So anything that's going on also in domestic Turkish politics has immediate repercussions also in the German society. We have very strong economic relations with Turkey. We have clearly also some relevant relationships in the migration and refugee case, as you may be aware. So we are probably better placed than others in Europe to at least keep the communication channel open with both parties involved. We have been very instrumental in orchestrating as a catalyst high-level talks between Greece and Turkey recently. These were, which is semi-public knowledge, were as close as that there was an announcement of a joint declaration of the Greek Prime Minister and the Turkish President was imminent within 48 hours, and was then cut off because Greece on the last day announced their bilateral agreement with Egypt, which was seen as a disturbance to these talks. I think these may be resumed to a certain degree as we speak. But I think we are in a position at least to moderate and coordinate talks like that. There are probably slight differences in terms of the intensity and of economic sanctions that would be implied according to certain behavior. As I mentioned before, we are clearly opposed to, this is more a case of made by Cyprus than by Greece, of blocking EU steps on the issue of Belarus and linking them with certain steps with regard to Turkey. So we may be cushioning some of that tensions at some point, but clearly the EU institutional setup is a strong one, and we're also in a very close relationship with Greece. I spent 2 hours last week with the Greek ambassador in Berlin, going through those issues in a lot of detail. So it is while we are probably more in a better position to keep a dialogue open with Turkey, it is not that we are, as Germans, to be seen on the Turkish side, but more as someone trying to balance and moderate the exercise.